Welcome to SCOTUStalk. I'm Amy Howe. I'm here with Evan and Oscie Thomas. Evan's new book, First, the biography of Sandra Day O'Connor, is out. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for coming.
Can we start with your decision to write this book? She's retired in 2005. I know you said in the end of your book it was an idea from Kate Medina, who was the editor of Justice O'Connor's book, Lazy Bee.
Yes. Justice O'Connor had been thinking about writing her memoir for a while, I think at the prodding of Kate Medina, her old editor at Random House, but it never happened. And so the family, and I guess, decided let's try to have a biography done. So then they went looking for writers, and I was already a Kate Medina author because I'd written a book about Nixon, and I'd gone to law school, so I was sort of an obvious choice. Although there was an anecdote, which I'll tell you, you can confirm this with Scott. This is the way these things work. Scott O'Connor is the son of Justice O'Connor, and he's told me that he went out to Bohemian Grove, which is this men's club where they in the forests, and he was with Christopher Buckley, who's a humor columnist, and Scott O'Connor went down the list of historians and biographers, and when he got to my name, Chris Buckley said, "Stop there." So that's how Scott told me they lit on me. Ossie's looking at me.
I was going to say, add the rest of the story.
The rest of the story is I sent an email thanking Chris Buckley, and I got back a very short email from Chris Buckley that said, "You owe me 10%."
You had incredible access to journals and some of her Supreme Court papers.
Yes, pretty much total access with an important exception, which we should talk about. Her correspondence, her papers are in the Library of Congress. They're closed. So we had to get her permission to see them, and we got total permission with the important exception that she didn't want anybody to see her papers while there's a sitting justice. So initially that meant her papers were open to us from 1981 to 1987 till Kennedy came on. Then Kennedy retired, so that opened them up to Justice Thomas in 1991. So we saw.
So you went in July and started reading away.
Absolutely.
We saw 10 years of papers.
We saw 10 years of papers, her complete papers, and we had access. Her papers were interesting the other way. She had a lot of oral histories that were done over the years. Lots of correspondence, and most interestingly, not all of her correspondence was at the Library of Congress. We were in her chambers, and I'm going to let Ossie tell this story because this is an interesting story.
We had access to all her photographs, her personal correspondence, her calendars. We actually had her calendars in this house for about 6 months, and we realized after a year that the story of the marriage, which we knew the family wanted us to talk about, we couldn't tell very completely because we had no letters between John and Sandra. So we
no love letters. Where are the love letters?
Where are the love letters from college, from law school? And we got permission to see. We went down to the basement with her assistant Linda Neary, and we saw a box that said correspondence, a big banker's box, and we said we'd like that box. And so
they were just sitting in the basement of the Supreme Court.
Yes,
okay,
in the storeroom.
She's in a store, in her store, private
okay.
storeroom.
And so we started looking through the box, and in there were the love letters between John and Sandra, but also 14 love letters from Justice Rehnquist to her in 1952.
From Bill Rehnquist to Sandra Day.
When he was clerking for Justice Jackson on the Supreme Court, and she was finishing the last few months of law school.
Surprise!
And he asked her in these letters to marry him.
And she had neither one of them, neither Justice Rehnquist nor Justice O'Connor had ever told their families about this.
This did not come up at the confirmation hearing.
Sure it didn't. Although there is a funny story in there that Harry Blackman, when she first comes on the bench, Harry Blackman, who sat next to Bill Rehnquist, leaned over and said, "Now, no fooling around."
Maybe he knew
I think he thought he was making a little joke, but
little did he know.
Little did he know. in 1952, I doubt there was much fooling around, to tell you the truth.
Right.
But it was, these were ardent letters, and we ran them by Janet Rehnquist, who was news to her, the daughter of Bill Rehnquist, and she gave us permission to use them, and the boys, Justice O'Connor's sons, gave us permission, so we used them, and they're poignant.
So anybody who's read more than 100 words about Justice Ginsburg knows about Marty Ginsburg and their love story. But this was a love story too. John O'Connor, Sandra Day O'Connor, what he gave up for her, and she tried to pay it back at the end of his life.
It was, he had not a full career, but a long career in Phoenix already. She was 51, he was 51 when she was named to the court. So he'd been a partner at the top law firm, or a top law firm in Phoenix, and he was slated, I think, to be the managing partner, but so excited about the chance for his wife to serve on the Supreme Court, and really worked to help get her there. And
lobbied behind the scenes.
He did, and was immensely proud, but when he got to Washington, his type of law practice, a general corporate practice, didn't have a match in Washington, and he joined one law firm for a number of years, and it wasn't very successful. And then he ended up really many years later joining a second firm that required him to be in Phoenix 1 week a month. So instead of being a proud lawyer, he started drawing on his tremendous social skills. And so she went out for him many more nights than she would have, so that he could dance, they could dance.
He could be the lion. He could be the big cheese at dinner, telling stories.
Right.
And she would be quieter at those dinners. And she loved to dance, and she's a party girl in many ways. But she said, some of those evenings I would have been home reading briefs. She had to read about 1,000 pages a day just to be a Supreme Court justice. And she did her homework. She was not somebody who skimped. She did her homework.
They wouldn't go out before oral argument.
Right. The night before oral argument, they would not go out.
But they did. They would do in Phoenix. They would do a couple show. They would do skits together. She always laughed at his jokes. She would hear them 20 times, and she would laugh as if she'd never heard them before. And she just was charmed by him. And
but he didn't feel threatened by her.
Which is really interesting. I mean, that is a great question, and we sure looked. Because I thought he must be. But from all evidence, including talking to their kids at great length, he had a remarkable ability to be relaxed and at ease with her. She could be annoying and bossy. That was the word she used, bossy. And the kids kind of roll their eyes and laugh about it. But the way they would tell it, she'd be off ordering everybody around, and he'd shrug it off. He'd make a joke about it. Yeah. He just kind of had this easy manner about her that was consistent. And I don't see any signs of jealousy. He was proud of her. Now, it was easier when he was in Phoenix because he's the big man. She is at the beginning. She's the one. Remember, she's the one who's at the top of her Stanford class. He's on law review, but he's not. But he's the guy who gets hired by the fancy law firm, right, with an office at the top of the bank building. She's hanging a shingle with some other poor schmo in the strip mall. So
and he knows that.
And he knows that. And so I think as a reporter asked him, "Well, do you have any plans to practice law with Sandra?" He says, "No, hold the ladder. I'm aboard." So he was, that's the way things were in Phoenix.
Right.
But he loved her political emergence.
Talking about the way things were, one of the lines that sort of jumped out at me, you write about her ability to marry ambition and restraint.
Yeah.
Was that sort of how she naturally was, or do you think it was sort of her recognizing that this was the way to go forward?
That's such a great question. I mean, she certainly did that. I was so admiring of the
chicken and an egg thing. I guess is the question.
She was obviously profoundly ambitious. I mean, you don't become the first woman majority leader of a state legislature in history unless you're ambitious.
Right.
But she also was restrained, and she's always getting baited by the men. Imagine the Arizona legislature in 1970. The one thing, a lot of them are drinking like crazy,
On the floor,
on the floor,
basically.
holding tea glasses that are not full of tea, and giving her a hard time. One of the things they did, when she got nervous, she would have this little shake, involuntary shake, and Alfredo Gutierrez, the leader of the Democratic leader, said, I used to say to my colleagues, watch, I'm going to make her twitch.
One of the things I found really interesting, too, was that she wasn't close with Justice Kennedy. You'd think that they would be sort of two peas in a pod, but maybe they were too much alike. And you didn't interview with him.
They're always respectful. He did not.
We tried.
We tried.
Yes, I was certain of that.
We tried, and he ultimately didn't.
Sure.
I'm guessing that he's going to write his own memoirs. I don't know that, but that's a guess. But in any case, he didn't talk to us. I think it's not that they were hostile, but they started out closer. But there's various things. For one thing, she's quite an unemotional, non-rhetorical opinion writer. He's not. He writes about his personal feelings. So they have different styles in that sense. She was a very kind of, let's not agonize over the problem, let's move on. He, by his own description, is an agonizer. They moved apart. Eventually they were together on abortion on Casey, but by the time of what they call partial birth abortion, which is sort of a misnomer, he's moving away from her. She
was you call her the most powerful Supreme Court justice of her time. She didn't really have much in the way of judicial philosophy, as they say at confirmation hearing. She was like, what's the right result? How do we get there?
I was interviewing her. We should talk about she had dementia, so my interviews all have to be seen in a certain context. But it amused me. I started to ask her a little bit about doctrine, and she said, oh, those kooky ideas. Now, this is somebody who had dementia, so
right,
take it. But she said it with that kind of a wicked smile. And if you look at her jurisprudence, she was not big on doctrine. And she didn't like law review articles. Her clerks would talk about this. She's not often citing law review articles. In fact, she would kind of urge her clerks not to be law professors, or at least be the dean. She wanted them to be in the arena, prosecutors and judges and, corporate counsel and all that. So she had I'm not sure it's an aversion, but she just wasn't doctrinal. What she was pragmatic. And she is in a great tradition of pragmatic justices, starting with, Oliver Wendell Holmes. What's the expression of the logic of the law is real. I think there's some famous Holmes line, the law comes less from logic than from experience. And the point is, and this would be relevant to Justice O'Connor, is you have to look at the actual impact of decisions. You have to look at the real world. You can't just be reading law review articles about doctrine.
And so that's why Scalia, for example, was so frustrated. There was no doctrine.
No doctrine. And Scalia was really frustrated, and he didn't hide it.
Well, that's a point, though, at which to say, as Evan said, that it's not just no doctrine. It's a concept. It may not be doctrine, but it's a concept that what the court is doing is it's a part of the government, and it's sometimes sending back decisions to the other branches of government to try again.
People think of the Supreme Court as the last word, the last place, the final judgment. Mm-hmm. That's not really the way she saw it. She saw it as part of a conversation with other branches of government, that on the very tough societal issues, you had to let them evolve gradually. And she was she would write these narrow, concurring opinions, very fact-based, that often would push things back to the state legislature or the local courts or the federal courts to continue evolving on things like big things like abortion and affirmative action as a long-term societal institutions working out a difficult problem. Now, that's not necessarily a definable jurisprudence, but I think that's a pretty accurate description of what she was doing.
It's a mindset. It's a mindset. Not a doctrine.
Yeah.
So when she hauled Tom Daschle and Trent Lott
to
her chambers, I'm trying to imagine that going on now.
Wow, I wish I knew more about that. I called those guys. I first heard this from a friend, that she'd hauled up Daschle and Gingrich. Gingrich said no. It turned out to be Daschle and Lott. Okay. Lott wouldn't speak to me, but Daschle did. And he said he was a little taken aback by the whole thing. A little bit. When these are the majority leader and the minority leader of the U.S. Senate are summoned to a justice's chamber to be lectured.
One is a Democrat, one's a Republican.
Because she thought the conversation had become uncivil. Justice O'Connor was big on civility. I mean, back in the state legislature when people abusing her and insulting her. She wanted to be civil, and with her colleagues, with her fellow justices, when Justice Scalia is mocking her, she wants to be civil. She really believed in civil discourse and civility. And so when the Congress is becoming uncivil in the 90s, she summons up the two leading senators and gives them a lecture on being more civil.
I'm trying to imagine that happening today.
No, forget it.
Or what the public reaction would be.
It's a little bit on the edge
Yeah.
on sort of separation of powers stuff.
yes.
I've asked about it. People kind of shrug. I don't have a whole lot of detail on it either. I mean, I've told you what I know.
It is, but you have to remember, though, she wasn't saying she wasn't taking a side on an
Sure.
issue.
Yeah.
Sure.
She was just saying,
You boys get along.
get along,
Right.
Do better, and show the public that you're leaders, and that you can enact laws without bickering.
This is maybe an interesting detail. I don't know what to make. I had her calendars. That meeting was not on her calendar.
That is interesting.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It did happen.
But
It
happened.
happened. I'm sure. You can ask Senator Daschle. It happened.
Oh, no, I believe you. What would you say? What would you say her legacy was as a justice, and what would she say?
Oh,
it
that's
was?
a good question. Man, that's a good thing Oscie, my wife's here. She can answer that question. Well, we'll split it up. I'll say my take on her legacy was that she understood that the court had to be sensitive to reality, including the public mood, and to work with the facts as they are, and to decide, not just kick every decision down the road. They had to decide, but to do it very mindfully of the pragmatic realities.
And I think we have to start, though, with major part of her legacy is that she was the first woman, and she would say early on, it's good to be first, but you don't want to be the last. And she was very conscious of being a success on the court. And she came in aware that she was mid-level state court judge, and that constitutional law hadn't been her favorite class in law school, and yet she just put her shoulder to the task and grew to love it and grew into the job and did it beautifully for 25 years.
The specific manifestation of her approach are the two big ones: affirmative action and abortion. She's sort of against affirmative action, but she's the one who saves it, as one of her clerks said.
She does.
And on abortion, she was very ambivalent, but she's the one who saves it. Undue burden is the law of the land because of her, and affirmative action in higher education has lasted this long. These two things may go
But
away,
they're still there right now.
but they're still there
Yes.
because of her.
Yes. I'm going to sort of return. She was very conscious that she was setting an example, not just for the nation, but for her clerks.
Yes,
Yes.
well, there she is. I mean, so they had started to hire women clerks. If you had, Blackman had, Powell had, one here, one there. She always tried to have two women, partly because she knew that was a way for them to really get into the top tier of the legal profession. When Justice Rehnquist was on the Supreme Court, she much later told someone who later clerked for Rehnquist, who was a friend of her son's, she said to him, he had that opportunity. It's something I had always wanted to do, but couldn't because she's a woman. Yeah. And so it's and then soon after that, she was named to the court itself.
It seems sometimes that she was almost setting an impossible example. You can go to aerobics, you can have a family, you can
Her
work
clerks talked
hard.
about that. This is all great, but how do we? That's great for her, but how do we do it?
I love the story where she urged them to go home, and someone said, "Does that mean you don't want the memo first thing in the morning?" And she said, "No, I still want it."
She came back to her chambers once and after an event and was surprised to see her clerk still there.
Quote,
it must
surprised.
have been 10 or 10:30 at night. And she said, "You go home now." So they all dutifully went out of the building with her. She went down to her car, left. They all went back into the building, back to work. So she, one of them, Lisa Kern-Griffin,
Yes, Lisa Kern
said that she wasn't just giving us a lesson in being good lawyers, she was giving us a lesson in life. And it was to notice people, notice things, be caring.
Never be ashamed of taking care of people.
Yeah.
Give good dinner parties.
Work hard.
Work hard.
Yeah. She would take them on outings. She would take them, make sure they always saw the cherry trees blooming. Whenever they bloomed. It could be raining or sleeting, and they were going to go see those cherry trees.
Forced marches down to the cherry trees.
That's right. Because they would never see them again. They were only clerking for 1 year. She didn't think many of them would come back to D.C., and she thought it was important.
One of her clerks, it wasn't exactly stopping to smell the flowers, but racing to smell the flowers a little better.
And I think we should say that the clerks were, as a group, individually and as a group, very nice people, very lovely to talk to us, and they said to us that
we interviewed 94 of them. There are 108 clerks.
I've noticed your yield was very high.
108 clerks. We interviewed 94 of them
because she had told them that it would be all right with her to cooperate, and she hoped they would, and they did, and she ended up staying in touch with almost all of them, and they were very fond of her, and we could tell that.
Most of them, certainly.
Most of them, yeah. She called their children grand clerks, and she knew their families, and it was quite an achievement.
Have the O'Connor boys, the sons read the book?
Yes.
Yes. What did they say?
I think you could have to ask them. I think they liked it.
Okay.
I think so.
They learned about their parents through the book.
Yeah, they don't. This I've had this experience writing other books. Families know things, but they don't know everything.
Right.
They know what they know, but there's a lot they don't
Yeah.
know. And so I think the boys learned from it. They were helpful, and I hope they liked it.
Oscie and Evan Thomas, thank you very much for the book.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing the time with us.
Sure,
Thank you
course.
very
Thank you.
much.
That's another episode of SCOTUStalk. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Casetext, our sponsor, and thanks to our production team, Andrew Ham, Edith Roberts, and John Levitan.